What would you think if I told you that the most powerful person in the room is not the one who speaks the loudest, nor the one who commands attention with wealth or beauty, but the one who cannot be moved? Imagine a presence so steady that insults fall away like raindrops against stone, where rejection is met not with desperation, but with silence that cuts deeper than any reply. Such a person seems untouchable, and yet their secret lies not in armor made of steel, but in disciplines forged within. The ancients knew this. Marcus Aurelius walked among emperors and courtiers, yet his strength was not in his armies, but in the mastery of his mind. Seneca, a man entangled in politics, intrigue, and the looming shadow of death, found in himself a kingdom that no tyrant could seize. Epictetus, once a slave, lived freer than many emperors because he understood the chain that binds most people is not forged of iron, but of opinion, fear, and the desperate hunger to be validated. To be untouchable in life is not to escape pain, but to meet it with an interior fortress so disciplined that nothing external can corrupt it. And this fortress is not cold. It breathes with fire, with self-respect, with an elegance that others cannot explain. You've seen it before. The woman who doesn't flinch when ignored, the man who doesn't crumble when betrayed, the soul who continues walking forward while others remain tangled in resentment. They move differently. Their silence speaks louder than arguments, their presence steadier than any threat. If you look closer, you'll see the psychological truth beneath the ancient words. Most people live as mirrors, constantly reflecting the moods, insults, and expectations of others. A slight frown from someone they love can unravel their entire sense of worth. A rejection at work feels like annihilation. This is the fragility of the ego, the false self that Jung described as an inflated mask, desperate for applause, yet terrified of its own shadow. The Stoic, however, refuses to be a mirror. He becomes the mountain. She becomes the ocean. Untouchable not because they do not feel, but because they have learned to master the storm within before the storm without arrives. And yet, this mastery is not about numbing emotion. It is about transmuting it. Seneca did not teach repression. He taught discipline. Epictetus did not suggest indifference. He demanded clarity. Marcus Aurelius did not flee from sorrow. He gazed at it until it revealed its nature. They knew that pain becomes poison when resisted, but transforms into strength when embraced without fear. In modern psychology, this echoes shadow work, meeting the rejected parts of yourself, the anger, the loneliness, the desire to be loved at any cost, and instead of running from them, integrating them. For the untouchable person has already faced their own darkness, and so the world's shadows cannot intimidate them. Perhaps you've experienced the opposite. You cared too much about someone's opinion, and when it turned cold, you unraveled. You clung to validation, and when it was withheld, you felt abandoned. This is the common condition: to be enslaved to external forces, chained to the whims of other people. But what happens when you no longer require applause? What happens when rejection no longer defines you, when betrayal no longer poisons you, when silence no longer terrifies you? You become a figure others cannot manipulate because their weapons no longer reach you. This untouchable state is not arrogance. It is serenity, born of practice. The Stoics would rise each day and remind themselves, I may be insulted today, rejected today, even betrayed today, but none of this can harm what is mine alone, the sovereignty of my mind. The modern mind craves the same sovereignty, though it often seeks it through distraction, validation, or performance. Yet true sovereignty is quiet, invisible, unshaken. The woman who embodies it may lose everything externally, and yet walk with the same calm gaze, because she knows her worth is beyond circumstance. The man who embodies it may face ridicule and loss, but remains whole, because he has already accepted the truth. Nothing outside can ever destroy what is within, unless you give it permission. This is where the untouchable life begins, not with grand gestures, but with disciplines. The discipline of silence when provoked, the discipline of presence when abandoned, the discipline of self-respect when tempted to beg. To live this way is to move beyond the fragile self that seeks applause into the eternal self that chooses dignity above all else. And the more you practice it, the more people will notice a shift. They will test you, as the world always does. But when their barbs fail to pierce, when their manipulations fail to bind, when their silence fails to control, you will stand as proof that the most powerful fortress is invisible. And so the first steps toward being untouchable are not outward, but inward. To face yourself as you are, without illusion. To confront the places where you are most easily wounded and to turn them into strength. It is not quick and it is not easy, but it is the only path that leads to sovereignty. The path the ancients walked and the path that still stands open before you. The untouchable presence deepens when silence becomes more than the absence of words. It becomes a force. The undisciplined speak to defend themselves, to explain, to prove their worth. But the one who has mastered silence understands that explanations often betray insecurity, and defense often reveals weakness. To say nothing when accused, to withhold justification when misunderstood, to allow others to project their shadows without absorbing them. This is power in its most subtle form. You have felt the sting of someone's words before, and perhaps your instinct was to answer, to fight back, to demand that they see you correctly. But in those moments, your power was handed over. The Stoic knows better. He knows that perception is the property of the perceiver, not of the accused. She knows that silence places the weight back on the other, that the absence of protest unsettles more deeply than 1,000 arguments. Jung would say the projection remains with the one who casts it, never finding purchase in the soul that refuses to receive it. Thus, the untouchable person practices the art of stillness, to let words pass, to let accusations dissolve, to let shadows return to their source. This silence is not passive. It is an active restraint, born of a sharpened will. For anyone can be silent in comfort, but to be silent in the storm, when the ego burns to defend itself, that is mastery. It transforms the battlefield. The aggressor grows confused. The manipulator loses control. The critic finds their words falling into emptiness. In this way, silence is not weakness. It is the sword of the soul, unseen, but devastating. Yet silence alone is not enough. To be untouchable requires the presence that accompanies it, the presence that does not collapse under gaze or rejection, the presence that radiates calm, as though anchored in something beyond the room. This presence is the fruit of self-possession. When a man enters a space carrying no hunger for approval, he unsettles those who live on validation. When a woman stands in quiet dignity, unshaken by neglect, she illuminates the fragility of those around her. The untouchable person is not loud, not flamboyant, not desperate. They are steady, and this steadiness unsettles because it reveals the instability of others. Psychology names this individuation the becoming whole unto oneself. Most people live half alive, borrowing their sense of self from others, taking cues from praise and criticism alike. But individuation demands the cutting of those strings, the facing of one's inner shadows, and the owning of one's wholeness. In that wholeness, presence emerges. You begin to feel it in your posture, your eyes, your very breathing. It does not seek attention, and that is precisely why it commands it. And yet, to cultivate this requires a discipline of loss. You must allow yourself to lose the need for recognition, to lose the craving for applause, to lose the false self that feeds on affirmation. This is terrifying, because it feels like death. But the Stoics would say, you must rehearse death daily, not merely the physical end, but the death of illusion, of pride, of false attachments. Only then does freedom bloom. For the untouchable one is not free because nothing can be taken from them, but because they no longer cling to what can be taken. Imagine the weight of a life lived this way. You would walk through the betrayals of friends without collapse. You would hear the harsh judgment of society and remain unmoved. You would experience the highs of praise, but treat them as passing clouds rather than eternal truths. This is not cold detachment. It is warm sovereignty. It is not the rejection of love, but the refusal to make love your master. It is not the avoidance of pain, but the clarity that pain cannot define you. Look at history. Epictetus, crippled by a cruel master, laughed at the thought that anyone could truly harm him, because his will remained his own. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by flatterers and enemies alike, wrote not of power or conquest, but of humility, clarity, and the discipline of inner freedom. Seneca, condemned to death, met his end with calm acceptance, proving that even death itself could not touch the one who had already mastered the art of letting go. And in our time, the same principles remain. When you detach from external validation, you unsettle the world. People who once controlled you through their approval will grow uneasy because you are no longer bound by their leash. Those who sought to wound you will find themselves speaking into the void, their power vanishing like smoke. Even love, when it arrives, will find you whole, not needy, generous, not desperate, free, not enslaved. This is the paradox of being untouchable. The less you cling, the more powerful you become. The less you explain, the more your silence resounds. The less you beg, the more others lean toward you. For in releasing everything, you embody the one thing others cannot grasp: freedom. The untouchable life grows even more profound when you begin to understand the true economy of emotion. Most people spend their energy recklessly, pouring their attention into trivial insults, fleeting temptations, or the desperate chase for recognition. But the Stoic disciplines themselves as if their inner world were a treasury, each thought a coin, each emotion an investment. To squander them on every provocation is to bankrupt the soul. To guard them with care is to grow rich in serenity. Consider how easily the ego is baited. A cutting remark lingers in the mind for hours, even days. A cold glance replays itself endlessly in memory. The psychological wound festers, not because the remark or glance has power, but because the self has given it power. This is the ego in its rawest form, a phantom self that depends entirely on how others perceive it. Jung would call it the persona, the mask you wear for the world, fragile, cracking under scrutiny, desperate to be maintained. The Stoic sees through the mask. They know that if their worth can be altered by the lips of another, then it was never true worth to begin with. So they practice a different economy. emotional restraint. Not repression, but choice. They do not forbid themselves to feel anger, grief, or longing, but they decide when those feelings deserve investment. This decision is the essence of freedom. Imagine holding within you the power to choose whether to be disturbed or at peace. Imagine the insult arriving, but instead of flaring into rage, you watch it pass like smoke on the wind. Imagine betrayal striking, but instead of unraveling, you see it as a lesson in the nature of trust and impermanence. This ability to choose is not fantasy. It is the result of daily discipline, sharpened like a blade against the whetstone of reality. The modern mind calls this emotional regulation, but the Stoic went further. They saw it as sovereignty. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The Untouchable One embodies this in every glance, every response, every silence. They are not numb, they are free. And here lies a paradox. The one who does not react impulsively often gains more influence than the one who shouts the loudest. Why? Because presence without desperation radiates authority. When others sense that you cannot be provoked, they instinctively respect you. When they realize you cannot be manipulated by flattery or fear, they grow cautious. Even in love, this presence shifts the dynamic. A partner who does not cling, who loves freely but does not beg, commands a deeper kind of devotion. For there is a magnetism in freedom, a quiet pull that outshines desperation. But to reach this place, you must confront the shadow of need within you. That part of you that still craves applause, that still fears abandonment, that still burns to be seen. To deny it is futile. To integrate it is liberation. Jung taught that the shadow, when unacknowledged, rules from the dark. The Stoic practice, then, is not denial, but confrontation. To sit with your hunger for validation, to admit its presence, and to train yourself to release it when it arises. In this confrontation, you begin to unshackle yourself from the invisible chains that most people mistake for love, loyalty, or success. It is not that you cease to feel, but that you cease to be owned by feeling. The untouchable person still weeps, still loves, still bleeds, but none of these movements enslave them. Their tears flow, and then they rise. Their love deepens, but never binds. Their wounds heal, and they continue walking. This is why they are untouchable, not because life never strikes, but because every strike passes through them without defining them. Think of it as the difference between glass and diamond. Glass shatters under impact, even if beautiful. Diamond, though carved and cut, though tested by fire and pressure, endures. It is not invulnerable, but it is incorruptible. The Stoic soul aims for diamond clarity. Pressure does not destroy it. It reveals its brilliance. And so, the practices continue. Silence when provoked, presence when abandoned, sovereignty of emotion, integration of the shadow. Step by step, the fortress rises, and in that fortress, not even death itself becomes an enemy. For the untouchable life knows that mortality is not loss. It is liberation from illusion. The untouchable state reaches its most radiant form when detachment becomes not only a shield, but a source of quiet radiance. Detachment is often misunderstood as apathy, as though the Stoic heart were made of stone. But the truth is subtler. Detachment does not mean you feel nothing. It means you are no longer possessed by what you feel. It means you can love without clinging, endure loss without collapsing, and face success without So many live chained to patterns of needing approval, replaying the wounds of childhood in their adult relationships, seeking in others what they were once denied. A cold parent leaves behind an adult who bends endlessly to earn warmth. A harsh critic leaves behind a soul who trembles before disapproval. Yet the Stoic teaches what psychology echoes. Your worth is not borrowed from others, and your peace cannot be outsourced. The untouchable life is born the moment you stop searching outside for what must be built inside. This is why rebirth often feels like death at first. To detach from external validation feels like abandoning the very oxygen you have always breathed. To stop chasing the lover who withholds affection feels like cutting off your own heartbeat. To stop defending yourself to critics feels like surrender. But in that surrender, something miraculous begins. The resurrection of the self. Not the fragile self that depends on applause, but the eternal self that exists in silence, in stillness, in dignity. The ancients rehearsed this daily. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that his own soul was sufficient. Seneca wrote of withdrawing into himself as into a sacred place. Epictetus declared that the only true chains are those we clasp willingly. They knew what modern psychology confirms. Attachment to external approval is the root of suffering. Release it, and you discover a joy untouched by circumstance. To live untouchable is not to withdraw from the world, but to enter it differently. You still love, but not from desperation. You still work, but not for recognition. You still suffer, but without letting suffering define you. The untouchable one becomes paradoxical, fiercely alive yet serenely calm, deeply feeling yet never enslaved. In their presence, others sense something rare, something magnetic, something they cannot control. This is why power shifts. Those who cling, who beg, who rage, these are easily manipulated. But the one who does not chase cannot be controlled. The one who does not fear silence cannot be coerced. The one who has already faced themselves in the dark cannot be blackmailed by life. Their calm unnerves tyrants. Their detachment confuses manipulators. Their serenity inspires lovers. And when the final test comes, whether in heartbreak, betrayal, or even death itself, the untouchable life does not shatter. It accepts, it transforms, it continues. The river flows, the mountain stands, the flame burns without consuming itself. This is the culmination of the Stoic path: to live in the world, yet not be owned by it, to walk through storms, yet not be swept away, to hold dignity as the only unbreakable possession. In the end, everything falls away: titles, wealth, even flesh. What remains is the soul that chose dignity over desperation, discipline over chaos, truth over illusion. That soul is untouchable, and in its final liberation, it smiles.